Okay, moving on to the third part of Chapter 7. We are back in our main project. We took a little detour to explain how we might take a marketplace asset, move it into a game feature, and then migrate that into another project. All those steps I've completed, and that gave us our buildable core folder, or game feature. And I've spent some time cleaning up the use of the marketplace asset. And for example, in the blueprints, you still see the actor component builder character. You see the actor component builder game mode, two of the things that we discussed in the last video. We still need the interface file for building. We need the actual build component. We need the construction manager, the save game. This is an enum, and a couple of other libraries. So what I've basically done is cleaned out the blueprint library to just the assets that we need. In addition, we have our meshes. Those are all the meshes, our materials, and our textures. So they're simplified to just the textures that we want to keep, and those items. We have created a structure for our inputs where we've defined a series of input actions for the 14 buildable slots that are going to be very similar to our ability slots, although we're going to have these centered in the screen and be able to pick and choose different buildable components and place them into the level. And then we have our actions that are more part specific. So we have these basic actions where I can cancel the placement, change pieces, previous piece, next piece, stability checks, destroy a piece, place a piece, rotate a piece, etc. And then my toggle of in and out of my build modes. So we've created all our action and our inputs. We've gone ahead and created a set of, let's go to maps first. We created a input mapping context for the keyboard and one for the gamepad. And we decided to split those into the active. So you have, let me go into a base first. So base says I can go in and out of build mode. So if I press B, I can toggle in and out of build mode. Inside of that, I have N, which allows me to change into submodes, and V, which allows me to do a stability check. So the build base input mapping context has these three buttons in it, basically allowing me to go in and out of build mode. Same thing for the gamepad. And then for the active, we have the activities that are, or the actions that are only really relevant when you're in build mode. So when I'm in build mode, I can rotate a piece forward or backwards. I can change the snap points. I can place a piece, destroy a piece, cancel placement of a piece, change to the next piece or the previous piece, which we can do with the scroll mouse. So basically what I've set it up for is period and comma will allow me to move left and right in the building piece sequence without having to click and change building pieces. So each of these actions are only valid when we're in build mode. And then the last one should be our action slots. And there are 14 action slots that are just aligned to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are three sets of, there are three sets. The base, which are always available, which allows me to go in and out of build mode. The active, which are only active when in build mode, but are actions that are on a piece. And the action slots, which are the 14 individual action slots. So that's how we've set up the input components. And then, of course, you have your playable maps that match those the same. And that sets up our input system. So actions, configurations, mappings, and then, of course, we have our bindings. where we bind each and every one of our input actions to a corresponding input tag. Very consistent with our other videos where we have the input action and we have the input tag. When that input tag is triggered, that causes an action to perform. So each one of those has been mapped to a corresponding input tag, and I'm not going to open them all, but you get the general idea. All right, so our inputs are set up consistent with a Lyra project. Our blueprint has been cleaned up to the least amount of actors necessary to complete the activities. Our meshes, materials, and textures are set up. We also set up our items. So each of the item definitions that can be given into the inventory system. So in this case, let's just open up a 45-degree wood beam. We have the wood beam. The inventory icon for that wood beam is the thumbnail that in the marketplace asset was on their HUD. And we have a description. It should not be stored. So it can't be stored in a bank. It can't be deleted, and it can't be dropped. So that basically defines how it appears in inventory. Then we have our buildable blueprint, which says when I attempt to use this particular building item, what are we going to, what's the blueprint of that? What are we going to generate? That is basically a reference to linking references does not seem to work well in a feature. So game pieces, I believe, actors. So these are the actors that we would end up placing in the world. So we have a reference to those components here. So 45 is this one. And then whether or not it's a single use. So if I have a single use blueprint, basically once I use it, it's gone. I built it once and it's removed from inventory. So we have our, let me close that up. We have our items. We've defined all of our various items. So therefore, in the world, if I go to our test map, in the world, I can either have events or objects or checkpoints that would basically give that. So in this case, this particular pickup is giving me every one of the buildable inventory items. So you can see it's giving me all 14 of the buildable items. When I pick that up, they will be moved into my inventory. No different than our ability that we were doing earlier. For the HUD, so there's a couple of elements here in the HUD. First thing is we defined the various default key bindings. So our 14 slots, no different than what we did for our abilities, and bound them to key 1. This allows us to basically have a default on all of our buttons for anything that we have set up for that. We actually will override the HUD layout. So for the HUD layout, up to this point, we've been using the standard HUD layout, which 99.9% of this is the same. Our mode status, our accolades, our reticle, our extension points, our extra, which is where our abilities spawn in. But we've added this new one right here, which says we've added an extension point as the HUD slot action bar. And that basically is a UI extension point widget. And you then have to establish what the extension point tag is. So HUD slot action bar is what we came up with, which means that anything I add to the HUD that references HUD slot action bar will show up here in the middle. of the screen. So we have our own HUD that we were required for this. And then there's some artwork, which basically just gives you some of the artwork. It's just following the same structure. So we basically moved assets around to follow the structure of a game feature. And then the core activities are occurring here. We have a variety of gameplay abilities. So toggling building mode, toggling continuous build. These are basically the code that was in the player controller, just readjusted. So when this activates and I want to enter or exit build mode, I basically determine whether or not I already have a tag on me called building. If I do have a tag on me called building, then I'm going to remove that tag and basically end building. So I'm going to remove the mapping context for any of the active things. Remember I said there's rotate. I purposely set up the rotate and the place pieces in a separate input mapping context. This allows me to remove that when I come out of building mode. I also remove the action slots out of building mode, so I can no longer press 1 through 14 to perform a build action. Those have been removed. And I cancel my build component. So if I was midway through a build item, this would go ahead and cancel that. And then I basically just end the ability. On the other side of that chain, if I activate and I do not have a build tag, the first thing I do is add the build tag. So this is kind of my toggle between every time you press B, you're either adding or removing the tag. And that's controlling the logic. Then we are adding the build input mappings, adding the quick slot mappings. We assume we're going to be in continuous mode. So continuous mode means when I place a floor or a wall, it's immediately going to spawn the next piece. So I default to continuous mode. The next thing we do is we set a gameplay effect on ourselves that we are currently in placing mode. We get the current piece, we spawn the building piece into the world, and we set ourselves in placing mode, and that's basically it for that. So when I press B, this gameplay ability is going to trigger. So let's see what that does when we do that. So how does that all manifest itself? Oh, I gotta turn them off. They're attacking, I think. When I go over to this scroll, I'm gonna make it full screen, and I pick up the scroll. In our inventory, you'll see that we have all of the items that were granted to us by the scroll. When I press B on my keyboard, my action bar shows up. The action slots being those 14 slots, and they are placed in the HUD at the tag that we specified in the HUD. I immediately entered continuous building mode and spawned the piece in slot 1. So if I press the 2 on my keyboard, we're going to switch to the short pole. 3, we're going to switch to the beam. 4, we're going to go to the 45. 5, we're going to go to the 26. 6, we're going to go to the floor. And we're in continuous build mode, which means when I place this beam, it's immediately going to give me another beam. And as I continuously build, I can build more beams. If I hit escape and go to my options, we will have our default bindings, which are all the normal stuff. We have our shooter bindings, which are all the shooter components. We have our ability bindings from our last video, which we probably didn't spend enough time on. And here are the 3 input mapping contexts. So the first one was enter and exit build mode with B. switch between build modes with N, cycle stability with V. My building controls are rotate the piece forward or backwards, X snap point, reset snap point, place the piece, destroy the piece, cancel, change, and then my action slots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then hyphen equals bracket, bracket. So each of these action slots and the mappable keys are all part of the standard how you define things in Lyra. And then if I were to scroll my middle mouse, which is rotate, actually it's probably a better piece. Let's do 7. As I rotate with my scroll mouse, the piece rotates. If I use the, I believe it was period and next, I can rotate through my building components, left, right, etc. And I actually don't remember what I set the snap points to. Maybe it was E, probably not E. So basically now I'm building, I'm in build mode, I place pieces, whether they're stable or not is all handled by the construction manager. If I press B and I'm in mid build mode, basically the action bar disappears, the piece that I was potentially placing disappears, and I'm back to normal mode. If I go back into build mode and I press my middle mouse button, I can destroy pieces. So destroy, destroy, destroy. Toggle B, toggle V to change the overall stability checking. So no stability check, partial stability check, full stability check. That's just pressing the V key. And then if I were to go into build mode, but then toggle off continuous building, it would place that piece but not spawn another piece. So replicating all the functionality of the original marketplace asset, but reconstructed in the Lyra starter game composition. So as a recap, if I go back to our content, the way we got there after migrating the marketplace asset into the game feature, we cleaned up the blueprint folder, removing all of the third-party characters, controllers, game mode, all the things that were not necessarily there, moving the relevant content into actor components. We created a series of abilities that encapsulate all the different components. So again, rotating is a very simple one. When this ability fires, we grab the builder component. If it's valid, we commit the ability, we add rotation to the component by 30 degrees, and we end the ability. So it's a super simple ability, but it allows us to encapsulate and modularize that little bit of gameplay feature into something that stands on its own. This is just when we grant it, we cache the component one time so we don't have to do it every time. So those are all the individual game play abilities for all of the different activities. Again, much more modular and controllable and editable. We have one gameplay queue. That queue is what actually triggers the slots. So when the gameplay queue is triggered, so here we get the queue firing. We grab the component class and cache it. We get the pieces that are active, and then we basically go through and determine the UI extension point, register the new widgets which are coming from this this array. So these are each of the individual quick slots, and basically add them to the extension. So that's a simple gameplay queue that shows the action bars on the screen. We defined our actions, our configurations, our mappings, and our input bindings. We defined our individual items, and we updated our HUD to have a new HUD layout. And in that HUD layout, we added the new slot at the bottom so that when we add the quick bars, they will appear in this general area. We go back to looking at the buildable core. Basically, we said, okay, add the building character component to the Lyra character, add the game mode component to the game mode. Then we added all of the keyboard configurations. So our base build for keyboard, our base build for gameplay, and then our base build for live, etc. We added the queue path so that we can have access to that gameplay queue. So we have a gameplay queue path telling the engine that there's yet another place to go look for gameplay queues. And then in our asset manager, we said, okay, you now have new player mappable inputs. You now have new Lyra experience assets. And so these down here tell the asset manager that we have these primary assets and that they can be found in this directory, input configs. That's what allows the asset manager to pick up those base classes. So the builder core game feature data set makes references to all the various elements. Everything has been restructured and reorganized in a consistent way to the Lyra approach to game features, but still retaining all of the functionality of the original marketplace asset. And so again, I just want to wrap this video up by saying, one, it's an outstanding package for building components. And two, it makes for a great demonstration of how you might take something that was constructed for UE4 and actually make it available in a game feature plugin for componentizing and modularizing your code even more. So thanks for watching this section. We'll probably do a few more supplementals as we dive deeper into some of the interconnection points with the other systems. But that was the intent of Chapter 7, is to just show you how you can move a marketplace asset from a UE4 structure into a more modular game feature UE5 structure. Thanks for watching.